Hey guys, tonight we delve into the surprisingly unglamorous side of medieval chivalry. Picture this: you're a knight, a walking fortress of gleaming steel, the envy of peasants, the hero of ballads. But what happens when there are no dragons to slay, no damsels in immediate distress, no epic battles on the horizon? What does Sir Lancelot actually quite bored do on a Tuesday afternoon when he's still, for reasons of readiness or just sheer medieval stubbornness, fully kitted out in his best, or perhaps second best? 50 pounds of personal protection. You see the sun glinting off your polished helm. Feel the familiar, slightly uncomfortable pinch of your arming doublet beneath the mail, and hear the rhythmic clink-clank scrape of your own movement as you wander the castle grounds. The air is thick with the smell of wood smoke, damp stone, and perhaps the distant, fragrant aroma of the pigsty you're trying very hard to ignore. It's not all charging steeds and vanquished foes. You know, most of it is, well, considerably less exciting, especially when you're wearing what amounts to a personal, clanky, human-shaped oven. Honestly, given the hygiene standards and medical knowledge of the time, you probably won't survive this extended period of being cooped up in metal without at least a spectacular rash, let alone an actual arrow. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. Your support, however small, helps keep these historical deep dives, or perhaps gentle descents, going. And hey, drop a comment with where you're listening from and what time it is for you. It's always fascinating to see how far these sleepy tales travel. Now, dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. Your day, as a knight ostensibly at leisure but still very much in armor, begins not with a gentle awakening to the chirping of birds, but with the stiff, cold reality of metal already pressing against you. Perhaps you only removed your helm and gauntlets last night, sleeping in the padded gambeson and mail hauberk for quick readiness, a common practice during times of alert or when stationed in less than secure locations. The mainstream historical fact here is that knights often did sleep in substantial portions of their armor if the situation demanded it, prioritizing readiness over comfort. Your squire, young Thomas, who sleeps on a pallet at the foot of your slightly more comfortable bed, if you can call a straw-stuffed mattress on a wooden frame comfortable, is already stirring. He knows the routine. You groan, not from a night of revelry, but from the simple dull ache of muscles that have been constricted and bearing weight even in slumber. The first order of business is to answer nature's call, an endeavor made infinitely more complicated by layers of leather, padding, and chainmail. You'll manage, of course, with some strategic unlacing that Thomas will later have to resecure, but it's hardly dignified. It's one of those little details that the soaring ballads of heroism conveniently omit. Imagine trying to explain that particular struggle to a starry-eyed admirer at court. My lady, the bravery is not in facing the foe, but in facing the privy in full leg harness. Probably wouldn't win you many favors. Once that delicate operation is concluded, the sounds of the castle waking up begin to filter in more clearly. The distant bellow of the sergeant-at-arms in the bailey, the clatter of cookware from the kitchens, the inevitable barking of dogs. These are the sounds of your world, a world encased in stone and, for you, steel. You sit on the edge of your bed, the mail shirt cool against your skin where the padding has shifted. It's a surprisingly intimate sensation. This constant contact with your protective shell, it becomes an extension of you, heavy and demanding, but also reassuringly solid. Historians still argue whether the psychological impact of constantly wearing armor fostered a sense of invulnerability or a heightened awareness of potential threats. It's a bit of a chicken and egg situation, really. Did the armor make the man aggressive? Or did the aggressive man simply feel more confident in armor? Thomas returns with a ewer of tepid water and a rough linen cloth. A quick splash on your face. A rub to get the sleep from your eyes. He's already laying out the pieces of plate armor that were removed last night. The greaves for your shins, cuisses for your thighs. Perhaps the breastplate if you opted for the luxury of sleeping without its unyielding curve pressing into your chest. Each piece is a familiar weight, a familiar shape. You stretch or attempt to. It's more of a constrained shrug within the mail, a slight rotation of the shoulders. The gambeson beneath, thick and quilted, is already starting to feel a bit lived in. Let's be honest, its aroma is probably closer to a hockey bag than a field of wildflowers. And this is just the start of your free time. The day stretches before you, a canvas of potential boredom, all experienced from within your personal metallic cocoon. You might even find yourself idly scratching an itch with a dagger point, a quirky or fringe tidbit being that specialized scratching sticks for reaching under armor were a real, if somewhat undignified accessory for the well-equipped knight. You haven't invested in one of those yet. Perhaps today's the day you realize its profound necessity. For now, it's time to consider the most pressing issue: breakfast. The process of fully arming, even for a day that promises little more than supervising some desultory training, or perhaps a slow walk along the battlements, is a ritual in itself. It's not something you can do alone, not with the full plate harness that has become increasingly common. Remember, young Thomas, your squire. This is where he truly earns his keep, and perhaps your grudging affection, or at least your dependence. He moves with a practiced efficiency, laying out each piece in the order it needs to be donned. It's a complex jigsaw puzzle of steel, leather straps, and buckles, and he's the master assembler. You stand there, patient as a warhorse being saddled, though perhaps with a bit more internal sighing. First come the arming clothes, the padded gamson or arming doublet you likely already have on, which provides cushioning against the chafe and impact of the metal. Thomas checks the laces, ensuring it's snug. Any looseness here will translate into uncomfortable rubbing or, worse, a poorly seated piece of plate that could compromise its protective qualities. Then, the mail chausses, if you're wearing them today, covering your legs, followed by the mail hauberk or haubergeon that covers your torso and arms. This flexible mesh of interlinked iron rings is already a significant weight, settling onto your shoulders like a very heavy, very drafty sweater. You can feel the individual rings press through the padding, a familiar sensation. Now, the plate. This is where the real artistry and engineering of the age shine, and also where your personal mobility begins to take a serious nosedive. Greaves are strapped to your shins, polans cover your knees, and cuisses are buckled around your thighs. Each buckle is pulled tight by Thomas, his young face serious with concentration. A loose strap could mean a piece shifting at a critical moment, or just an annoyingly persistent clank with every step. He works his way up your body, the breastplate, perhaps with an attached fold and tassets to protect your lower abdomen and hips. Then the backplate. These two large sculpted pieces are buckled together at the sides, encasing your torso in a rigid shell. You take a deeper breath, feeling the confinement. It's like being hugged by a particularly inflexible but metallic relative, a very, very persistent one. Next are the rear braces for the upper arms, couters for the elbows, and vambraces for the forearms, all meticulously articulated to allow a surprising, though still limited, range of motion. Historians still argue whether the increasing articulation of late medieval plate armor significantly improved a knight's agility in dismounted combat, or if it primarily served to make wearing the damn thing marginally less torturous for longer periods. It probably did a bit of both. Let's be fair. You can raise your arms, bend your elbows, but every movement is accompanied by the gentle symphony of sliding rivets and creaking leather. It's your personal soundtrack for the day. Gauntlets are next. Intricate constructions of smaller plates protecting your hands and fingers. These are often works of art in themselves, but also crucial for maintaining a grip on your sword or lance. Trying to pick up a dropped coin while wearing these, forget about it. It's a task requiring the patience of a saint and the dexterity of a brain surgeon operating with oven mitts. A mainstream historical fact is that the design of gauntlets evolved significantly, from simpler mitten-like forms to complex fingered versions offering greater dexterity. Yours are a decent compromise, but you still wouldn't want to thread a needle in them. Finally, the helm. If you're not expecting immediate trouble, you might opt for a simpler bassinet, perhaps with a detachable visor, or even just a serviliere or skull cap under a padded arming cap if you're feeling particularly relaxed and the sun isn't too bright. But if full readiness is the order of the day, it's the great helm or a close helm, which Thomas will place over your head, plunging you into a slightly dimmer, more muffled world. Your vision is framed by the narrow eye slits. Your breathing echoes back at you. It's like looking at the world through a very expensive, very heavy letterbox. The quirky or fringe tidbit here is that some knights had their helms custom padded with fabric scraps from their ladylove, a sort of romantic, if slightly sweaty, token. You're not sure your current lady friend's silk would appreciate the interior of your helm after a few hours. With the last buckle fastened and the last strap adjusted, you are complete. A walking, clanking testament to the blacksmith's art. You take a step, then another. The weight is immense, a constant companion. Thomas hands you your sword belt, which you buckle over the fault. The familiar weight of your longsword a counterpoint to the armor itself. You might also have a dagger, a mace. You are a mobile weapon platform. And now, having spent a good half hour or more getting dressed, it's definitely time for breakfast, assuming you can still fit through the doorway. That's joke number 2, though sometimes, with the more elaborate shoulder pieces, it's not entirely a joke. One more adjustment, a final check from Thomas, and you're ready to face the day, or at least the castle dining hall. Now, fully encased, or at least mostly encased if you've opted for a slightly less battle-ready this instant ensemble. You make your way to the Great Hall, or perhaps a smaller, less formal dining chamber for the morning meal. Your every step is an announcement. Clank, creak, thud, heads turn. Not necessarily an admiration anymore. You're a fixture here. After all, but more in that way, people notice a particularly loud piece of machinery starting up. Navigating the castle corridors in full kit is an acquired skill. You learn to judge widths, to turn slightly sideways for narrower passages, and to avoid bumping into tapestries or, heaven forbid, a serving wench carrying a tray of breakables. That sort of collision rarely ends well for the breakables, or for your dignity when you're trying to apologize through a visor. You arrive at the trestle tables. If you're lucky, there's a space on a bench. Sitting down in armor is its own little adventure. You don't so much sit as carefully lower yourself, trying to avoid a sudden, undignified thump that rattles your teeth and every rivet in your harness. The placard or fald at your waist might dig in, or the tassets might splay out awkwardly. You make the necessary adjustments. A subtle wriggle here, a slight lift and resettle there. It's all part of the armored ballet. The table is laden with the usual morning fare trenchers of coarse bread, perhaps some leftover cold meats from last night's supper, cheese, ale, or watered wine. If you're high enough in the pecking order, you might get some pottage, a thick stew of grains and whatever vegetables were available. The challenge now is getting the food from the table to your mouth, especially if you're wearing gauntlets and a helm with a visor. Many knights would remove their gauntlets for eating, and perhaps even their helm if the situation felt secure enough. A mainstream historical fact is that communal dining was a cornerstone of castle life, reinforcing social hierarchies and camaraderie. But camaraderie can be a bit strained when your tablemate is elbowing you with a steel cowder every time he reaches for the salt. Let's assume you've kept your helm on but raised the visor, and perhaps decided to brave the gauntlets. Picking up a slippery piece of cheese with steel-clad fingers is a lesson in humility. You try to spear it with your dagger, a common enough practice, but sometimes it just skitters away like a frightened mouse. The bread is easier. You can usually manage to tear off a chunk. The ale, poured into a wooden or pewter cup, requires a careful tilt, especially if your visor is up. You don't want to pour it down the front of your shiny breastplate. Rust, remember, is the ever-present enemy. Some helms, particularly later close helms, had visors that could be propped open at various heights, offering a compromise between protection and, say, not starving. You watch as others around you, similarly armored or perhaps in lighter attire, engage in their own breakfast battles. Sir Reginald is having trouble with a sausage, which keeps escaping his gloved grasp. Young Sir Geoffrey, ever the show-off, is attempting to peel a hard-boiled egg without removing his gauntlets, a feat that is drawing some amused glances and probably a few side bets. Historians still argue whether specific eating daggers or utensils were commonly modified for use with gauntlets, or if knights simply made do with standard implements and a lot of patience. The evidence is sparse, suggesting it was probably more the latter, with a healthy dose of just stab it and hope for the best. The conversation, if any, is usually about mundane castle business, the previous day's training, or perhaps the quality of the ale, a topic of perennial importance. You might hear snippets about a lord's upcoming visit, or a rumor about unrest in a distant fiefdom. It's all filtered through the slight muffling effect of your helm, even with the visor up. Chewing is also a more conscious activity. You don't want to accidentally bite the inside of your own face because your jaw movement is slightly constrained by the bevor or chin protection of your helm. It's these little things, these constant, small discomforts and adjustments, that make up so much of your armored existence. It's not exactly the heroic feasting depicted in tapestries. Why, is it more like a slightly awkward picnic in a tin can? A quirky or fringe tidbit for you some particularly fastidious nights? Or perhaps those with very sensitive noses would sometimes place a small sachet of dried herbs inside their helm to try and mitigate the, shall we say, robust aroma that could develop after a few hours of wear, especially if breakfast involved onions. You make a mental note to ask Thomas to find some lavender, or maybe just a stronger brand of soap. As you finish your meal, carefully wiping your gauntleted hands on a piece of bread, napkins are for the truly refined, or those not wearing gauntlets. You contemplate the next riveting installment of your free time. Perhaps a stimulating session of standing around in the courtyard. The possibilities within the confines of your armor and the castle walls are endless. Or at least, they feel that way. Breakfast, such as it was, is now a greasy memory slowly being absorbed by the padding of your gambeson. It's time for what often passes as leisure for a night-morning drills and weapons practice. Even if there's no war on, skills need to be honed, muscles kept in something resembling fighting trim, and the sheer bloody awkwardness of moving and fighting in armor needs to be constantly reinforced until it becomes second nature. Or at least third nature. You make your way to the bailey, or a designated training yard, the familiar clank thump of your armored stride echoing off the stone walls. Other knights are already there, some in full harness like yourself, others in lighter training gear, perhaps just a gambeson, mail shirt, and a simple helmet. Squires are scurrying about, carrying practice weapons, water skins, and looking generally busy and slightly terrified of getting underfoot. The sergeant-at-arms, a grizzled veteran named Boren who probably wrestled bears in his youth if his scars and general demeanor are anything to go by, is already bellowing instructions. Today, it seems, is focused on dismounted combat drills. Joy. This means footwork, weapon handling, and perhaps some practice against the quintain or the pell. The quintain, a pivoted wooden arm with a shield on one end and a weighted bag on the other, is a classic. Hit the shield well, and it swings harmlessly. Hit it poorly, or too slowly, and the bag swings around to give you a solid thwack on the back of your head. It's a great teacher of speed and accuracy, and also a reliable source of amusement for onlookers when someone gets it wrong. Especially if that someone is Sir Reginald, who seems to have a magnetic attraction to the swinging bag. You try not to smirk. Too much. You take your stance. Sword in hand. Even a blunted practice sword feels heavy after a while, especially when you're already lugging around 50-plus pounds of steel. The drills begin advances, retreats, parries, thrusts, cuts. Bourne watches with a critical eye, his voice cutting through the morning air like a rusty saw. Sir Knight, are you dancing a jig or fighting for your life? Move your feet. You focus on your breathing, trying to find a rhythm within the confines of your breastplate. Sweat is already starting to prickle under your arming cap and trickle down your back. Your gambeson, remember that fragrant companion, is about to get a whole lot more personal. A mainstream historical fact is that rigorous and continuous training was essential for medieval knights. Their effectiveness in battle depended not just on the quality of their armor and weapons, but on their physical conditioning and skill, which could only be maintained through constant practice. This wasn't just about looking good, it was about survival. You partner up with another knight, Sir Kalen, for some sparring. Blunted weapons, of course, but the intent is still serious. Blows are exchanged, ringing off breastplates and helms. You feel the jarring impact even through the padding, a reminder of the forces involved. Your movements are slower, more deliberate than they would be unarmored, but also more powerful. relying on the momentum of your armored body. It's like two heavily laden cargo ships trying to outmaneuver each other in a narrow channel. Graceful, it is not. Historians still argue whether the extreme specialization of knightly combat, particularly in full plate, made them less adaptable on diverse battlefields, or if their role as heavily armored shock cavalry and elite infantry was so crucial, it outweighed any lack of versatility. When you're in the thick of it, practicing to face other steel-clad behemoths, versatility feels less important than sheer stopping power, and the ability to withstand a blow that would cleave an unarmored man in two. You try a disarming maneuver Kalen showed you last week. It almost works. Almost. He grunts, recovers, and presses his attack. This goes on for a while, a cycle of exertion, impact, and the growing damp heat inside your personal sauna. A quirky or fringe tidbit from this era is the concept of judicial duels, or trials by combat, where guilt or innocence was determined by a formal, often armored fight. While not exactly free time activity, the skills honed in these practice sessions were directly applicable. You can imagine the pressure fight well, or be proven guilty and possibly dead. Makes your current sweaty practice session seem positively relaxing by comparison. Boren calls a halt for a water break. You gratefully lift your visor, gulping down lukewarm water from a leather skin Thomas offers. It tastes like heaven, or at least like slightly metallic, leathery heaven. Your face is flushed, your hair plastered to your forehead, and it's not even midday yet. You can see why some knights, when truly at leisure and not expecting any trouble, might forget a few pieces of their armor. Perhaps the rear braces, or the entire cuirass. But today, you're in for the full experience. The drills will continue after the break. Lucky you. The morning drills, thankfully, have concluded. You've sweated enough to fill a small moat, or at least it feels that way. Boren has dismissed you with a grunt that might have been approval, or possibly just indigestion. Now, with the sun climbing higher and the courtyard bustling with more routine activities, you find yourself with a few hours of genuinely unstructured, if still heavily armored, free time. What to do? What to do? The options are, shall we say, somewhat limited by your current state of dress. A quick game of chase with the castle children? Probably not. They'd run circles around you, and the sound of you lumbering after them would likely scare the pigeons from here to the next county. So, you opt for a classic nightly pastime courtyard patrol and banter? Or, to put it less grandly, leaning against a sturdy stone wall in a patch of shade, observing the comings and goings, and occasionally exchanging a few gruff pleasantries with other similarly occupied members of the garrison. It's not exactly thrilling, but it beats more pell drill. You find a good spot near the main gate, offering a decent view of the traffic. Merchants arrive with wagons laden with goods, their calls echoing as they negotiate with the gate guards. Messengers on tired horses clatter in, dusty and urgent. Off-duty men-at-arms engage in a game of dice in a sunny corner, their laughter occasionally cutting through the general hubbub. You are a silent, steely observer. Your presence alone is a statement. A knight in full harness, even at rest, is a symbol of the Lord's power and readiness. You are part of the castle's security, a visible deterrent, even if your main internal battle right now is against the persistent itch under your left pauldron. Remember that scratching stick idea? It's looking better and better. You try a subtle shoulder wiggle, it doesn't help. You consider asking Thomas to fetch your dagger so you can attempt some targeted relief, but that feels a bit undignified. The struggles are real, my friend. Sir Kalen, also free from Boren's tender mercies, ambles over, his own armor glinting. He leans beside you, the combined weight of your persons probably doing wonders for the structural integrity of this particular section of wall. Quiet day, he rumbles, his voice slightly muffled by his own helm. Visor raised. Too quiet. You might reply if you're feeling particularly dramatic. Or perhaps, aye, the kind that makes you wish for a good tavern brawl, just to liven things up. This is the kind of high-level strategic discussion that occupies knights in their downtime. Or maybe you talk about the new batch of warhorses that arrived yesterday, or the chances of getting decent wine at supper. A mainstream historical fact is that castles were not just military installations, but also complex social and economic hubs. The courtyard you're currently loitering in would have been a hive of activity, with artisans, servants, traders, and soldiers all going about their business. You're witnessing the medieval world in miniature, all from your shaded metallic perch. You see a cooper hammering hoops onto a barrel, a woman feeding chickens that have inexplicably wandered into the main bailey, a group of squires attempting to carry a ridiculously large tapestry across the yard without dropping it in a puddle. It's life, unfiltered, and slightly smelly. Then there's the inevitable gossip. Who's in favor with the Lord? Who's fallen out? Are the rumors true about Lady Annalise and the visiting minstrel? Probably, if the minstrel values his kneecaps. He's already halfway to the next kingdom. This is the medieval equivalent of scrolling through social media, except it's live, in person, and everyone's wearing significantly more iron. Historians still argue whether the close-knit, often isolated nature of castle life fostered stronger bonds of loyalty and camaraderie, or if it simply amplified petty jealousies and rivalries. Like any small town, probably a bit of both. One day Sir Calin is your trusted brother-in-arms. The next you're arguing over whose squire is better at polishing greaves. It's a delicate ecosystem, a quirky or fringe tidbit for your armored contemplation some nights. Particularly those with a bit too much time on their hands and a creative streak would personalize their armor with subtle engravings or even painted insignia beyond the standard heraldry. Not full-on custom paint jobs like a modern motorcycle, but small, personal touches. You idly examine a scratch on your gauntlet and wonder if you could get a tiny dragon etched there. Or maybe a particularly fierce-looking rabbit, just to keep people guessing. It's these little thoughts that help pass the time when you're essentially a very well-protected, slightly bored statue. The sun shifts. Your patch of shade shrinks. Perhaps it's time to find another wall. Or dare we dream? Time for the midday meal. The clang of the cook's ladle against a pot in the distance sounds suspiciously like a dinner bell. Hope springs eternal, even in a breastplate. The distant, hopeful clang from the kitchens was indeed a prelude to the midday meal. Your stomach, insulated beneath layers of padding and steel, gives a hopeful rumble. Or perhaps that was just a rivet settling. It's hard to tell sometimes. You and Sir Calin, your wall-leaning companion, exchange a look that says, "Food might be worth the effort of moving." And so, with the coordinated grace of two particularly well-armored tortoises, you begin the trek back towards the Great Hall or a similar designated feeding trough. The journey isn't long, but every step in full harness is an investment of energy. You notice the way the light catches the polished surface of Caelin's pauldrons, the intricate articulation of his fald. It's easy to forget, when you're sweating and itching inside your own suit, that from the outside, you probably look quite impressive, or at least impressively metallic. Arriving once more at the tables, the scene is much like breakfast, perhaps with a few more participants now that the morning's initial burst of activity has subsided. The menu might be slightly more substantial, more pottage, perhaps some roasted fowl if it's a good day, pies of dubious content but undeniable heft, and always more bread and ale. The challenge, once again, is ingestion without major incident. You've already been through this once today, so you're practically a seasoned professional at armored eating. Or so you tell yourself. You find a space on the bench, the wood groaning a polite protest under your weight. This time, you decide to remove your gauntlets. It's a small concession to comfort and practicality, but it makes a world of difference. The simple act of being able to feel the texture of your bread, to grip your cup with something other than articulated steel, is a minor luxury. You place the gauntlets carefully beside you on the bench, hoping no one accidentally sits on them. They're surprisingly easy to misplace for something so large and metallic, especially if young Thomas isn't hovering nearby to keep track of your various shed parts. A mainstream historical fact is that while depictions often show knights feasting in full, glorious armor, in reality, they would remove pieces for comfort when not in immediate danger, especially helmets and gauntlets during meals. Practicality usually trumped pageantry when food was involved. You survey the spread. Today looks promising. There's a joint of some roasted meat that smells passably good, and the pottage actually has visible chunks of something that might be a carrot. Victory. You use your dagger to spear a piece of meat, then transfer it to your trencher, your slice of bread plate. Eating is a deliberate process. You lift your visor, take a bite, chew thoughtfully. Lower your visor if you're feeling cautious or if there's a lot of ambient dust spitting from enthusiastic storytellers nearby. Repeat. It's not elegant, but it gets the job done. The conversation around you is a low hum, punctuated by the clatter of daggers on wooden plates and the occasional hearty laugh. You might catch snippets of talk about hunting, a favorite noble pastime, or the latest news from a traveling merchant about affairs in the wider world. Did you hear the wool prices are up in Flanders? Not exactly riveting stuff for a mighty warrior, but it's the fabric of daily life. Historians still argue about the exact nutritional content and variety of the average medieval diet, particularly for soldiers and castle inhabitants. While often caricatured as bland and repetitive, there was likely more seasonal variation and access to different foodstuffs than we sometimes imagine, especially in a well-supplied castle. Still, you wouldn't say no to a bit of pepper now and then, or maybe a nice, fresh salad. A man can dream. A quirky or fringe tidbit relates to table manners, or the occasional lack thereof. While there were certainly codes of conduct, especially at higher status tables, the reality in a busy, mixed-rank dining hall could be a bit more robust. Sharing cups was common, as was using your own dagger for pretty much everything. And bones often just tossed on the floor for the dogs that invariably lurked under the tables, hoping for such generosity. You discreetly nudge a gristly bit off your trencher with your foot. Fido will appreciate it. You try to engage in some light banter with Sir Kalen, who is currently wrestling with a particularly stubborn piece of fowl. Losing the battle? Kalen. You might quip. He grunts, finally tearing a leg off with a triumphant rip. This bird was clearly a veteran of many campaigns, he retorts, gnawing on his prize. It's these little moments of shared, slightly absurd experience that build camaraderie. Two men, encased in the finest defensive technology of their age, struggling to eat chicken. There's a certain irony there. As the meal winds down, you feel a sense of mild repletion. The food wasn't gourmet, but it was filling. And the ale, as always, was ale. You carefully wipe your dagger on a scrap of bread, then sheath it. Time to retrieve your gauntlets. Putting them back on feels like returning to full duty, a small but significant step back into your knightly persona. The afternoon stretches ahead. Perhaps a nap is in order, though napping in full armor is an art form all its own, usually involving finding a cool, quiet corner where you can lean without toppling over. Or maybe, just maybe, something interesting will happen. One can always hope. The midday meal has settled, and the afternoon sun is beginning its slow descent, though there are still many hours of daylight left. The thought of a nap, while tempting, is perhaps a bit too slothful, even for a knight technically at leisure. Besides, sleeping upright in this contraption can lead to a very stiff neck, and some rather embarrassing snoring sounds amplified by the helm. So, you decide on a slightly more active, yet still relatively relaxed, pursuit an armored amble outside the castle walls. Not a patrol, mind you. Just a constitutional, with 50 pounds of extra weight for fun. You signal to Thomas, who seems to have a sixth sense for when you're about to require his services, or, more accurately, when you're about to do something that involves your horse. He scurries off to the stables. You, meanwhile, make your way to the castle gate, your passage once again announced by the rhythmic clank-scrape-clink of your armored progress. The guards at the gate, who've seen you come and go countless times, give a cursory nod. They're probably used to your eccentricities by now. Just stretching the old iron? You might say with a wry grin they can't see behind your visor. Your destrier, your warhorse, is brought out. A magnificent beast, strong and well-trained, essential for your role in battle. But for a gentle ride like this, you might have opted for a smaller and more agile palfrey if you were truly thinking of comfort. However, the destrier is already saddled, and it seems a shame to disappoint him. Mounting a horse in full plate armor is another of those skills that looks much easier in illuminated manuscripts than it is in reality. A mainstream historical fact is that knights often needed assistance or a mounting block to get onto their tall war horses when fully armored. Due to the weight and inflexibility of their harness, there's no shame in it, it's just physics. You might use a small block, or perhaps Thomas and another stable hand will give you a helpful, if slightly undignified, shove up. Once you're in the saddle, however, you feel a sense of rightness. The armor, the horse, they're meant to be together. You are a centaur of steel and sinew. Or at least, that's the romantic notion. The reality is you're perched quite high up, and the armor, while offering superb protection, also restricts your ability to subtly guide the horse with your legs and seat. It's more about broad cues and a very understanding animal. Luckily, your horse, Thunderclap, you weren't feeling particularly creative that day, is a patient soul. You ride out across the drawbridge, the clatter of hooves on wood a familiar sound. The air outside the castle walls feels fresher, carrying the scent of fields, woods, and distant rain. You decide on a path that skirts the edge of the forest, a well-worn track used by hunters and woodcutters. It's peaceful. The only sounds are the creak of your saddle, the jingle of your harness, the soft thud of Thunderclap's hooves, and the chirping of birds who seem entirely unperturbed by your metallic passage. Perhaps they think you're a very large, shiny beetle. You don't ride fast, this isn't a charge. It's a meander. You observe the landscape. A hawk circles overhead. You see a deer dart into the undergrowth. These are the simple pleasures. Of course, even on a peaceful ride, you are still a knight in armor. Your senses are still attuned to any sign of trouble. A habit deeply ingrained. A rustle in the woods that sounds a bit too deliberate. A flicker of movement in the distance. You notice these things, even if they turn out to be nothing more than a boar rooting for truffles or a peasant returning from the fields. Historians still argue about the practicalities of knights undertaking long reconnaissance missions in full armor. While offering maximum protection if ambushed, the sheer fatigue and visibility would have been significant drawbacks, suggesting lighter armor was often preferred for such tasks unless immediate combat was anticipated. Your current jaunt is hardly reconnaissance, more like a very slow, very heavy nature walk on horseback. A quirky or fringe tidbit involves the occasional necessity of, shall we say, answering nature's call while on horseback and in armor. While not ideal, and certainly not comfortable, medieval saddles and armor sometimes had to accommodate such eventualities on long rides or during protracted military campaigns. It's another one of those unglamorous realities best not dwelled upon, but you can imagine the contortions and strategic unlacing that might be involved. Thankfully, your current ride is short enough that this particular emergency protocol is unlikely to be invoked. You hope. You ride for an hour or so, enjoying the illusion of freedom, even as the weight of your helm presses down and the sun warms your breastplate to the temperature of a moderately active forge. It's a strange dichotomy. This blend of constraint and mobility, of solitude and the constant clanking companionship of your own gear. As the shadows begin to lengthen slightly, you turn Thunderclap back towards the castle. The outing has been mildly invigorating. Or at least, it has successfully consumed another chunk of your free time. And you didn't even have to hit anything with a sword. A win-win, really. Returning from your armored equestrian escapade, feeling perhaps a tiny bit more refreshed, or at least thoroughly warmed through, you dismount again. With a modicum of assistance or a well-placed block, and hand Thunderclap over to Thomas, who gives the great beast an affectionate pat. The late afternoon sun casts long shadows across the bailey. The main work of the day for most castle inhabitants is winding down. But for you, a knight with free time and still stubbornly encased in steel, the question remains what now you've drilled, you've patrolled or leaned. Anyway, you've eaten twice. You've even been for a ride. Surely there must be some form of actual recreation possible, even in this mobile Iron Maiden. You wander over to a slightly less busy corner of the courtyard where a few off-duty men-at-arms are engaged in a game of bowls, or something approximating it with roughly spherical stones and a lot of enthusiastic shouting. Could you join in theory, Yes, in practice. Bending down to roll a bowl while wearing a full plate harness, complete with fold and tassets restricting your waist and hip movement, would be an exercise in extreme awkwardness, if not outright impossibility. You'd likely topple over like a felled oak, much to the amusement of the onlookers. So, bowls is out. Dice. Perhaps. You could certainly hold a dice cup in a gauntlet, and throwing dice doesn't require a huge range of motion. You approach a group huddled in a doorway, their heads bent in concentration. The clink of coins accompanies their muttered curses and cheers. It's an option, but the thought of trying to fish coins out of your purse with gauntleted fingers, or worse, trying to pick them up if you drop them, is a deterrent. Remember the earlier coin dropping scenario, not keen for a repeat. What about something more knightly chess? Perhaps a mainstream historical fact is that chess was a popular game among the medieval nobility, seen as a strategic pastime fitting for warriors and thinkers. You could certainly sit at a table and play chess. The pieces might be a bit fiddly for your gauntlets, but not impossibly so. You spot Sir Kalen emerging from the stables, looking similarly at a loose end. Kalen, you call out, your voice slightly booming from within your helm. Fancy a game of chess, or are you still recovering from that chicken's valiant last stand? He grins, or you assume he does, and ambles over. Chess sounds preferable to another wrestling match with my dinner. He agrees. You find a relatively quiet spot in the lee of a buttress, and Thomas, ever resourceful, procures a somewhat battered chessboard and a mismatched set of carved wooden pieces. Sitting opposite each other on rough wooden stools, two metal-clad figures contemplating a miniature battlefield. Must be a slightly surreal sight. Moving the pieces with gauntleted hands is indeed a delicate operation. You tend to knock over adjacent pawns or send your own knight skittering across the board with an ill-judged nudge. Apologies, you mutter for the third time, carefully righting a fallen bishop with the tip of your steel-clad finger. These gloves are not designed for such subtle maneuvers. Kalen, struggling similarly, nods in understanding. Perhaps we should invent gauntlet chess, he suggests, with much larger pieces and a reinforced board. Not a bad idea, actually. The first joke of the afternoon, and it's a collaborative one. Historians still argue about the extent to which recreational activities were adapted for individuals in armor, or if knights simply removed their armor for most forms of leisure. Common sense suggests the latter for anything strenuous or requiring fine motor skills, but for sedentary games like chess or drafts, remaining partially or even fully armored if one was, say, on duty but with a moment of quiet was certainly feasible, albeit cumbersome. You can imagine a long siege, with knights passing the endless, tense hours with such games, their armor a constant reminder of the danger just beyond the board. A quirky or fringe tidbit there are accounts of living chess games being played in some courts, with actual people dressed as chess pieces moving on a giant board. One shudders to think of the logistics if the pieces were fully armored knights. Sir Rook to e4. And try not to trip over the Lady Queen's destrier this time. It would be a spectacle, if nothing else. Your game with Kalen proceeds slowly, punctuated by the occasional clink of metal on wood as a piece is moved with less than perfect grace. Your mind, usually occupied with more martial concerns, or the persistent itch under your pauldronet's back, grapples with gambits and defenses. It's a different kind of strategy. But strategy nonetheless. You sacrifice a pawn to gain position. Kalen counters with a well-placed knight. It's surprisingly engaging, a mental respite from the physical realities of your armored existence. For a little while, you can almost forget the weight on your shoulders and the way your greaves are digging into your ankles. Almost. The sun dips lower, painting the stone walls in warmer hues. Your game will likely be interrupted by the call to evening prayer or the preparations for the supper meal. But for now, in this small corner of the castle, two ironclad figures ponder their next move. The world outside their 64 squares momentarily forgotten. The chess game with Sir Kalen was a welcome distraction. But, eventually, the fading light and the distant sounds of the castle preparing for evening made continuing impractical. Besides, your back was starting to ache from sitting on that hard stool in an unyielding cuirass. Now, as twilight begins to settle, Another crucial, if decidedly unglamorous, aspect of a knight's free time comes to the fore maintenance. Your armor and weapons are not just expensive, they are your life. Keeping them in peak condition is not a chore to be shirked. Rust, as you've been frequently reminded, truly never sleeps, and a loose rivet or a dulled blade can mean the difference between victory and a very unpleasant end. You make your way to a slightly more private area, perhaps a small antechamber near your quarters, or even your own sleeping space if it's large enough. Thomas is already there, having anticipated this phase of your day. He's laid out a collection of tools and supplies oil, fine sand or emery powder for scouring rust, leather strips, soft cloths, a small hammer, and various punches and rivets. It's a mobile workshop dedicated to keeping Sir Clanky That's You in fighting fettle. First, the armor. If you got particularly sweaty during those morning drills, and let's be honest, you did, or if there was any rain during your afternoon amble, then drying the inside of the armor and its padded linings is crucial. The gambeson, that long-suffering undergarment, will need to be aired out, and ideally washed at some point, though some point in medieval hygiene terms could be quite a while. For now, you focus on the metal. Thomas helps you remove the larger pieces. Breastplate, backplate, or perhaps the helmet. You inspect each piece carefully in the flickering lamplight. Any new dents from training? Any signs of rust? Particularly in the joints and crevices where moisture can accumulate. A mainstream historical fact is that maintaining plate armor was a constant and labor-intensive task. Rust was the primary enemy, and even a small patch could weaken the metal over time. Knights relied heavily on their squires or servants for this, but many would have taken a personal hand in ensuring their gear was perfect. You take a cloth soaked in oil and begin to meticulously wipe down a pauldron. Thomas might be working on a greave, using a bit of sand on a leather pad to gently scour away a spot of oxidation. It's slow, methodical work. You have to be careful not to be too abrasive, lest you wear away the precious metal itself. This is where you might find those little imperfections, the signs of wear and tear that tell the story of your armor's life. A scratch here from a deflected practice sword, a slightly loose rivet on a tasset that needs peening tight with a hammer and punch. Historians still argue about the typical lifespan of a full suit of plate armor and how frequently pieces would need to be repaired or replaced. Given the expense, knights would likely try to make their armor last as long as possible, with frequent repairs and modifications. It wasn't uncommon for armor to be passed down or sold, refitted for a new owner. Your own suit might have elements of varying ages, a testament to its ongoing service. While you're tending to the armor, your weapons also need attention. Your sword blade is wiped clean of any moisture or grime, then lightly oiled to prevent rust. The edge is inspected. Even if you haven't been in a real fight, practice can dull a blade. Or worse, nick it. If it needs serious sharpening, that's a job for the armorer or a skilled smith. But for minor touch-ups, you might have a whetstone. Your dagger gets similar treatment. If you carry a mace or warhammer, you check the haft for splits and ensure the head is secure. Every piece of your arsenal is given this careful scrutiny. It's a quiet, almost meditative process, a world away from the clang and fury of battle or even the boisterousness of the training yard. It's you, your gear, and the focused task of preservation. A quirky or fringe tidbit: some knights develop their own secret recipes for armor polish or rust inhibitors, often involving bizarre ingredients like eel oil, bear grease, or various herbal concoctions. Whether these were any more effective than standard oil and diligent scrubbing is debatable, but it speaks to the importance placed on maintaining their precious steel. You yourself stick to good old-fashioned oil and elbow grease, though you did once hear a traveling merchant swear by a polish made with powdered unicorn horn. You decided to give that one a miss. Probably for the best. Unicorns are notoriously hard to powder. That's your second joke, and you're getting quite good at this internal monologue thing. As you work, the castle around you grows quieter. The sounds of the day give way to the softer murmurs of the evening. This focused, practical activity is a grounding counterpoint to the more martial aspects of your life. It's a reminder that even the mightiest knight is reliant on the integrity of his equipment. And as you carefully buff a sheen onto your breastplate, you feel a sense of satisfaction. It's not the thrill of victory, but it's the quiet pride of a craftsman, ensuring his tools are ready. Another day survived, another day your armor has served you well, and with a bit of care, it will do so again tomorrow. With your armor and weapons cleaned, oiled, and ready for whatever tomorrow might bring another riveting round of courtyard observation. Perhaps your thoughts might turn to more social, or at least less solitary pursuits. Even a knight in near constant armor needs a bit of human interaction that doesn't involve being yelled at by a sergeant-at-arms or trying to spear a slippery piece of cheese. The Great Hall, now cleared of the midday meal's remnants and perhaps lit with more candles or a central hearth fire, often served as the castle's communal living room in the evenings. Here, you might find other knights, ladies of the household, important guests, or even the Lord himself, relaxing after the day's duties. You make your way there, your familiar clanking a bit more subdued now that you've had a chance to tighten any loose straps and ensure every piece is sitting just right after your maintenance session. You're still in your harness, of course. Removing it completely is a commitment, a signal that your day is truly done, and you're not quite there yet. Besides, there's a certain presence one has when fully armored. It tends to make people offer you the better seat by the fire. A small perk, but a welcome one. The atmosphere in the hall is usually more relaxed in the evening. People are winding down. You might see a group listening to a minstrel if one is visiting, his songs of daring deeds and tragic love echoing softly in the high raftered space. Or perhaps someone is reading aloud from a romance or a book of poetry, a popular form of entertainment. A mainstream historical fact is that literacy was not universal, but it was increasingly common among the nobility, and shared reading was a way to disseminate stories and knowledge. You might not be a great scholar yourself, but you can appreciate a well-told tale, even if your helmet makes the acoustics a bit strange. You find a spot, perhaps near Sir Kalen again, who seems to be your designated free time and armor buddy. He's nursing a cup of wine and watching the minstrel with a thoughtful expression. You settle onto a bench, the metal of your armor cool against the stone wall behind you. It's moments like these that the sheer inconvenience of your attire can fade slightly. You're a part of the social fabric of the castle, a protector, a man of status, even if you do sound like a mobile kitchen utensil collection every time you shift your weight. Conversation is usually a mix of the day's events, news from afar if a traveler has brought any, and, inevitably, shop talk discussions of horses, weaponry, past battles, or upcoming tournaments. Tournaments, when they happen, are the Super Bowl and a fashion show rolled into one for the knightly class. A chance to win glory, renown, and sometimes substantial prizes. Even discussing hypothetical matchups or reminiscing about a particularly spectacular joust can pass an hour or two quite pleasantly. Remember when Sir Geoffrey tried that fancy Italian at lance grip and nearly ended up in the cheap seats? You chuckle at good times. Well, not for Geoffrey. Historians still argue about the precise nature and frequency of social interaction between men and women in a medieval castle setting, particularly involving armored knights. While chivalric literature is full of knights wooing ladies with flowery speeches and daring deeds, the day-to-day reality was likely more complex. An armored knight is not exactly conducive to delicate flirtation. Imagine trying to whisper sweet nothings through a visor, or accidentally clanking your gauntlet against a lady's hand when you meant to offer a polite bow. My lady, your eyes shine brighter than my newly polished, gorget, smooth, very smooth. Still polite conversation. Games like chess, as you've already experienced. And even dancing, though armored dancing is a spectacle best reserved for the truly brave or truly inebriated, were all part of the social scene. A quirky or fringe tidbit, some medieval courtesy books, offered advice to knights on how to behave in polite society, including tips on conversation, table manners, and how not to offend the ladies. One can only imagine a chapter titled Interacting with the Fairer Sex whilst wearing 60 pounds of razor-sharp metal, a knight's guide to not causing accidental impalement. It would have been a bestseller. You, thankfully, are content for now to observe and perhaps offer a gruff comment or two. You're not trying to win any hearts tonight, just trying to enjoy a moment of relative peace before the inevitable call to supper or bed. The fire crackles. The minstrel's song winds to a close. Met with polite applause, your gauntleted claps are particularly resonant. Someone starts a new story. You lean back, feeling the familiar pressure of your backplate. It's not comfortable, not exactly, but it is familiar. Part of you. This is your world, a world of stone, steel, duty, and these brief, shared moments of camaraderie in the flickering light. It's not always exciting, this life of an armored knight in his free time, but it is, in its own way, strangely peaceful, for now. As the evening deepens and the social buzz in the great hall begins to subside, another, more solemn obligation might call evening prayer or compline. The last service of the day, religious observance was deeply woven into the fabric of medieval life, for peasant and noble alike, for a knight whose very code of chivalry was often intertwined with Christian virtues in theory. If not always in practice, attending chapel was a regular part of the routine, even when at leisure and still very much in your metallic casing. You rise from your bench, the now familiar chorus of clinks and scrapes announcing your departure from the hall. Other devout or simply duty-bound members of the household are also making their way towards the castle chapel. This might be a grand, ornate space in a wealthy lord's castle, or a more modest, functional room set aside for worship in a smaller fortification. Regardless of its grandeur, it is a place of sanctuary and reflection. Your footsteps echo more loudly on the stone floors of the corridors leading to the chapel, the sound somehow more pronounced in the quieter, pre-service atmosphere. Entering the chapel, you might dip your gauntleted fingers into the stoup of holy water, a slightly awkward maneuver, and make a clumsy sign of the cross. You find a place to stand or kneel. Kneeling in full plate armor is a significant undertaking. You don't just gracefully genuflect, it's more of a controlled descent, relying on the articulation of your leg harness polans and cuisses and a fair bit of balance. Getting back up again is equally challenging, often requiring a bit of a push with your hands or even a discreet nearby pillar for leverage. Benches or choir stalls, if available, are a godsend. You try to be as unobtrusive as possible, but it's hard to be subtle when you're essentially a walking suit of armor. Your presence is unavoidably resonant. Every shift of weight, every slight adjustment, creates its own little metallic sigh or creak. The priest begins the service, his voice a calm drone in Latin, the universal language of the church. Candles flicker on the altar, illuminating religious icons or simple wooden crosses. The air might be thick with the scent of old incense and beeswax. A mainstream historical fact is that the church played a central role in medieval society, influencing everything from politics and warfare, think crusades, or the truce of God to daily life and personal morality. For many knights, their faith provided a framework for their actions and a source of comfort in a violent and uncertain world. You bow your helmed head at the appropriate moments, the metal cool against your forehead if you've raised your visor. You might find your mind wandering slightly during the service. Perhaps you reflect on the day's events, the drills, the conversation with Kalen, or maybe you ponder more spiritual matters. The juxtaposition of your warlike attire with the peaceful sanctity of the chapel is stark. You are a man of war, yet you are here, seeking solace or fulfilling an obligation in a house of peace. It's a paradox that many knights lived with. Historians still argue about the depth and sincerity of knightly piety. Was it genuine faith, a social convention, or a way to morally justify their often brutal profession? For many, it was likely a complex mixture of all three. One can be a devout believer and still be very good at cleaving one's enemies in twain. The medieval mind was quite adept at compartmentalizing such things. A quirky or fringe tidbit from this period involves votive offerings made by knights. These could be wax replicas of a limb they wished to see healed, a model of a ship they survived a storm on, or even miniature suits of armor given in thanks for victory or deliverance from peril. You can imagine a tiny, perfectly crafted gauntlet sitting on a side altar, a silent testament to a knight's gratitude. It makes your own clanking presence seem a bit less out of place, perhaps. Just another piece of dedicated metal in a holy space. The service continues. Psalms are chanted. Prayers are recited. You try to follow along. The Latin phrase is familiar even if your understanding of the theological nuances is a bit hazy. Your knees are definitely starting to complain about their prolonged contact with the cold stone floor, even through the padding and steel. You subtly shift your weight, creating a small symphony of creaks that probably makes the priest momentarily lose his place. Sorry, Father. Occupational hazard. You hope divine forgiveness extends to noisy worshippers and 60 pounds of plate? That's your third little jest for the section. If you count hoping for forgiveness for being a human wind chime, as the service concludes, you make your way out. The process of rising from your knees a minor spectacle of controlled effort. The cool night air greets you as you step outside the chapel. There's a sense of quiet fulfillment, or at least of duty done. The stars are beginning to prick the darkening sky. Your day, encased in steel, is drawing nearer to its end. One final major hurdle remains supper, and then the blessed relief of unarming. But for this moment, under the vast expanse of the heavens, you are a knight having paid his respects to a higher power, still clad in the tools of his trade, a somewhat weary, slightly creaky sentinel of the faith. The evening service in the chapel has concluded, and a measure of peace, or perhaps just quiet resignation to your metallic cocoon, has settled over you. But the night is not yet over, and neither is your time in armor. Often, a significant portion of a knight's free time, especially if stationed in a castle on alert or during periods of tension, wasn't truly free in the modern sense. It was time spent waiting. Waiting for a call to arms, waiting for orders, waiting for something, anything, to happen. This is the armored vigil, a state of readiness that could stretch for hours, days, or even weeks. So, after chapel, you might find yourself back in the Great Hall, or perhaps in a guard room near a critical gate or tower. The supper meal will be served soon, but until then, you exist in a state of suspended animation. Fully equipped. You are a weapon on standby. You might lean against a wall again. Wall leaning is a severely underrated knightly skill, perfected over centuries. Or you might pace a short, familiar route. The rhythmic clanking, a counterpoint to the castle's nighttime, sounds the distant hoot of an owl, the murmur of guards on the battlements, the crackle of torches. This is where the true boredom could set in. A heavy, listless feeling that even the weight of your armor couldn't quite press out of you. You've done your drills, you've eaten, you've socialized as much as one can in a mobile ironworks. You've prayed. Now you simply are. A mainstream historical fact is that castle garrisons, even in peacetime, had to maintain a state of readiness. Knights and men-at-arms would often be assigned to rotational duties or simply be expected to be available at a moment's notice, which meant long periods of being armed and waiting. You might use this time for quiet contemplation, if you're the philosophical type. Ponder the nature of chivalry, the meaning of honor, why Sir Reginald always seems to spill ale down his breastplate. Deep thoughts. Or, more likely, you're just trying to stay comfortable, or at least minimize discomfort. You adjust a strap here, subtly shift your weight there. You might even, if no one of higher rank is looking, discreetly lift your visor for a better breath of air, or to wipe a bead of sweat from your brow before it trickles into your eye. It's these little battles against the armor itself that fill the empty spaces. Conversation with other knights in a similar state of waiting tends to be sporadic and low-key. Grand pronouncements and boisterous tales are less common now. It's more shared silences, occasional comments on the weather, or speculation about when the next meal will arrive. Food becomes a significant marker of time in such a waiting game. Historians still argue about the psychological effects of these prolonged periods of armored readiness. Did it heighten a knight's senses and aggression, or lead to a dulling complacency born of boredom? Perhaps it varied by individual. Some might chafe and grow restless, while others might find a stoic calm in the routine of preparedness. You suspect you fall somewhere in between stoically restless, or perhaps restlessly stoic. A quirky or fringe tidbit for this period of anticipatory idleness: some knights, to pass the time and keep their hands busy if they weren't wearing gauntlets at that precise moment, might engage in small crafts like whittling, repairing small leather items, nor even simple knot tying or rope work. Not exactly what you'd see in a heroic tapestry, Sir Lancelot, master of macrame, but practical skills and a way to keep the mind from stagnating. You, however, are still fully gauntleted, so macrame is off the table. You might idly trace the outline of a rivet on your cuisse with a steel-clad fingertip, a mindless, repetitive motion. It's the medieval equivalent of fidget spinning, but much, much heavier. The weighting can play tricks on your senses. Every unexpected sound from outside the castle walls could be a threat, or just the wind. Every distant shout could be an alarm, or just some overly enthusiastic peasants heading home from the village tavern. You learn to filter, to assess, but a part of you always remains on edge. It's the price of being a protector, of wearing the mantle and the medal of a warrior. The sheer, unadulterated boredom of it is something the ballads conveniently forget to mention. They sing of the charge, the clash, the victory, not the endless hours spent beforehand, feeling your leg harness slowly constrict the blood flow to your nether regions. Oh, the glory of the slightly numb posterior, a line tragically missing from most epic poems. Eventually, the summons for the evening meal will come, breaking the monotony, or perhaps a real alarm will sound, and all this waiting will pay off as you and your comrades spring into action, already armored and ready to face whatever threat has emerged. But for now, you wait. A silent, gleaming statue in the dim light, a symbol of power and patience, a knight in his free time, which is really just another form of duty. The weight of it all, the armor, the responsibility, the boredom, is immense. The final meal of the day, supper, has been consumed. It was much like the others, functional, filling, and eaten with the usual armored finesse, or lack thereof. The great hall is emptying, the fires burning lower, and a sense of impending quiet is settling over the castle. For you, this means one thing the moment you've been anticipating, with a longing usually reserved for battlefield reinforcements or a particularly good vintage of wine. It's time for the twilight's blessed unbuckling, the ritual of unarming. You make your way, with a step that feels infinitesimally lighter, despite still being fully laden, towards your quarters. Thomas, your ever-faithful squire, is there probably as eager for this process to be over as you are, because it means his day is also nearing its end. The room is lit by a flickering candle or a small oil lamp, casting long, dancing shadows that make your armored form seem even more imposing, and perhaps a little monstrous. But the monster is tired. Very tired. The unarming process is essentially the arming process in reverse, but imbued with a sense of glorious liberation. First, the sword belt is unbuckled, and the familiar weight of your longsword is lifted from your hip. You might hand it to Tomet, who will carefully place it on its stand or wipe it down one last time. Then, the helm. Oh, the sweet, sweet relief of the helm coming off. Thomas gently lifts it, and the world suddenly becomes brighter, louder, and your head feels incredibly light, like a balloon threatening to float away. You take a deep, unconstrained breath, savoring the cool air on your sweaty face and hair. It's like emerging from a diving bell. Next, the gauntlets are unstrapped and removed. Your hands, stiff and perhaps a little sore from being encased in steel, flex and stretch. The simple ability to wiggle your fingers freely is a minor miracle. Then, Thomas begins on the series of buckles and straps that hold your plate harness together. The pauldrons, rear braces, couters, and vambraces are unfastened and carefully laid aside. Each piece removed feels like a tangible weight lifted not just from your body, but from your spirit. You can already feel your shoulders unhunching, your posture subtly changing as the burden lessens. The breastplate and backplate are unbuckled at the sides, and Thomas helps you lift the heavy, rigid shell of the cuirass away from your torso. You can expand your chest properly for the first time in hours, a deeply satisfying sensation. It's like taking off a corset made of iron. A mainstream historical fact is that squires played an absolutely crucial role in the arming and unarming of knights. Without their dedicated assistance, a knight in full plate was significantly hampered. This dependence fostered a close, if hierarchical, relationship between knight and squire. Thomas grunts with the effort of lifting your breastplate. It's not light, even for a strong lad. Then, the leg harness tassets, falled, cuisses, polans, and greaves. Each strap undone, each buckle released, brings you closer to freedom. Standing there as the pieces come off, you feel progressively less like a walking fortress and more like a somewhat weary human being. The male hauberk or haubergeon is next. This, too, is a heavy garment, and lifting it over your head after a long day is a struggle. You probably assist Thomas, pulling it off with a sigh of relief as the cool air hits your sweat-dampened arming doublet. Finally, if you wore male chausses, those two are removed. You are left standing in your padded gambeson or arming doublet, which is by now thoroughly soaked with sweat and probably smells like something that would make a goat faint. But even this constricting, fragrant garment feels like a loose silk robe compared to the unyielding steel you've just shed. You stretch, really stretch, for the first time all day. Arms overhead, a deep bend at the waist as much as the tired muscles will allow, a satisfying series of cracks from your spine. It's pure bliss. Historians still argue about the long-term physical effects on knights of regularly wearing such heavy and constricting armor. Arthritis, chronic back pain, and joint problems were likely common occupational hazards. The price paid for unparalleled protection in their era, looking at the pile of metal now lying on the floor, you can easily believe it. A quirky or fringe tidbit. Some knights had elaborate, padded stands or armor dummies on which to arrange their harness when not in use. This not only kept the pieces organized, but also allowed them to be displayed, a testament to the knight's status and wealth, looking like a silent, steely sentinel guarding the room. Your own setup might be less grand, perhaps just a sturdy chest or bench, where Thomas carefully arranges the components. Ready for their morning cleaning. You run a hand through your damp hair, feeling almost giddy with lightness. The day's accumulation of grime, sweat, and the sheer pressure of the armor is palpable. You feel like you've shed not just pounds of metal, but layers of accumulated tension. The world feels different, softer, more yielding. The floorboards under your thinly soled shoes seem almost springy. It's an illusion, of course, born of contrast, but a delightful one nonetheless. The unbuckling is complete. You are, for the first time since dawn, truly at ease in your own skin, or at least in your very sweaty underpinnings. The promise of rest is near. The last buckle has been undone. The final piece of plate armor carefully set aside by Thomas. You stand in your sweat-soaked arming doublet, feeling like you've just shed a second, much heavier skin. The relief is immense, almost euphoric, but it's quickly followed by an acute awareness of the day's physical toll. This is the post-armor recuperation phase, a time for tending to the various indignities inflicted upon your body by a day spent as a walking, talking, or mostly clanking metal sculpture. First, the gambeson. Peeling that off is another moment of liberation, though it reveals skin that is likely damp, sticky, and imprinted with the pattern of the quilting, and perhaps a few strategic chafe marks. You hand the fragrant garment to Thomas, who will ensure it's aired out, a task requiring either a strong stomach or a conveniently downwind location. Now, in just your linen braze, underwear, and shirt, you can finally assess the damage. You run your hands over your shoulders, wincing slightly. The weight of the pauldrons and mail always leaves a dull ache. Your hips and lower back might be stiff from the constriction of the fold in the breastplate. And then there are the specific points of contact where the armor, despite its careful design and your padded underlayers, has inevitably rubbed and chafed. Common trouble spots include the armpits, the groin, the backs of the knees, and anywhere a strap was pulled particularly tight. A mainstream historical fact is that chafing and skin irritations were constant problems for men in armor. Good padding helped, but prolonged wear, especially with movement and sweating, made some level of discomfort almost unavoidable. Thomas might bring you a basin of warm water and a rough cloth. Washing away the day's grime feels like a sacrament. The water quickly turns murky, a testament to your exertions. You scrub at your skin, trying to remove the lingering feeling of being encased. It's not just about cleanliness, it's about reclaiming your own body from the unyielding embrace of the steel. Then comes the inspection for more serious issues. Blisters, raw patches, perhaps even minor cuts or bruises from a particularly awkward fall during drills, or a blow that landed just so. For these, that you might have a small pot of soothing ointment or salve. These concoctions, often made with herbs like comfrey, also known as knitbone, for its supposed healing properties for fractures, plantain or yarrow, mixed with animal fat or beeswax, were the medieval knight's best friends after a long day in harness. You apply a generous dab to a particularly angry-looking red patch on your inner thigh. The cool balm is instantly soothing. Remember that crocodile dung sunscreen we joked about in a different context. Medieval medical and cosmetic preparations could be surprisingly effective, or at least enthusiastically applied, drawing on a rich tradition of herbal remedies. Historians still argue about the overall health and hygiene standards of medieval knights compared to other societal classes. While they had access to better food and living conditions than peasants, their occupation was inherently dangerous and physically wearing. The constant minor injuries, the stress on their joints from armor, and the risk of infection from wounds were ever present. It's a wonder any of them made it to old age, though some clearly did, presumably looking like very distinguished, slightly battered oak trees. A quirky or fringe tidbit, some knights would engage in specific stretching exercises or even rudimentary forms of massage to alleviate muscle soreness and stiffness after doffing their armor. There are even depictions of bathhouses where attendants might help with this. While you don't have a personal masseuse on hand, Thomas's skills probably don't extend that far, and you're not sure you'd want them to. You do your best to stretch out your aching limbs, trying to work out the kinks. A slow neck roll, a gentle twist of the torso. Each movement feels both stiff and wonderfully free. You might also take this time to hydrate properly, sipping water or perhaps some small ale. Rehydration is key after sweating so much inside your personal oven. As you sit on the edge of your bed, tending to your various aches and enjoying the simple freedom of movement, you can reflect on the day. It was like many days, a mixture of routine, minor discomfort, and the ever-present weight of your responsibilities. But now, that weight is temporarily lifted. You feel lighter, more human. The phantom sensation of the armor might still linger. A ghostly pressure on your shoulders, a remembered constriction around your chest, but it's fading. This period of recuperation isn't just physical, it's mental too. A chance to decompress, to transition from warrior back to man, before sleep claims you. And you need that sleep because tomorrow, the whole clanking, cumbersome, vital process will begin all over again. But for now, there's just the quiet room, the cooling salves, and the blessed, unarmored peace. The last of the salves have been applied to your various chafes and sore spots. The sweat of the day has been washed away, as much as a basin of tepid water and a rough cloth can manage. You're clad now in a simple linen nightshirt, a garment that feels almost sinfully light and airy after the day's oppressive layers of padding and steel. The pile of armor components, neatly stacked by Thomas in the corner, gleams dully in the candlelight, a silent, metallic testament to the burdens you've shed. It looks almost like a discarded shell, an exoskeleton left behind by a creature that has outgrown it. If only for the night, you sit on the edge of your cot, the straw-filled mattress rustling beneath you. The castle is quiet now, truly quiet. The boisterous sounds of the great hall have faded. The clang of the smithy is long silent, and even the guards on the ramparts seem to move with a more subdued tread. Only the occasional hoot of an owl or the distant bark of a dog breaks the stillness of the night. This is the time for final thoughts, for the day to unspool in your mind before sleep finally takes hold. You think back on the day, a fairly typical one in your armored existence. The clanky awakening, the ritual of arming, the minor challenges of eating, the sweat of the practice yard. You recall the bored observation from the courtyard walls, Kalen's company during the surprisingly engaging chess game, the familiar scent of oil and emery during the evening maintenance. Each moment, mundane as it might have seemed at the time, was experienced through the filter of your armor, the restricted vision, the muffled sounds, the constant weight. A mainstream historical fact that bears repeating is that the life of a medieval knight, even in supposed peacetime within a castle, was one of constant readiness and physical encumbrance if they chose to remain armed. Free time was a relative concept, often spent in the very tools of their trade. Your body, though now unburdened, still bears the memory of the steel. Your shoulders might feel strangely light, almost as if they expect the weight of the pauldrons to still be there. You might find yourself moving with a certain caution, a learned habit from navigating narrow spaces in full kit. Even though you now have ample room, this phantom plate, this echo of steel, is a common sensation. It's as if the armor has imprinted itself not just on your skin in the form of bruises and calluses, but on your very proprioception, your sense of where your body is in space. Historians still argue, and likely always will, about the deeper psychological impact of a life spent so often encased in armor. Did it create a sense of separation from the unarmored world, a feeling of being perpetually other? Or did it foster an unshakable sense of identity, a profound connection to the knightly ideal, where the man and his martial shell became almost indistinguishable? Perhaps it was a bit of both. You are Sir Knight, defined by your vows, your skill, and yes, by the gleaming harness that is both your protection and your prison. As you finally lie back on your cot, pulling a coarse woolen blanket up against the night's chill, you might entertain a quirky or fringe tidbit you once heard that some old knights claim they could dream more vividly of battles when they slept near their armor, as if its proximity somehow infused their subconscious with martial spirits. You glance towards the corner where your breastplate catches a faint gleam. You're not sure about martial spirits, but you wouldn't be surprised if your dreams tonight feature the familiar sensation of a slightly too tight gorget, or the rhythmic clanging of your own footsteps. The armor, even when not worn, has a way of permeating everything. You close your eyes. The day is done. The steel sleeps, and soon. So will you. Ready to reassume the burden with the dawn. The life of a knight in armor, even in his scant free moments, is a heavy one indeed. The weight of the day, a physical manifestation of your duties and your station, has finally been set aside, piece by laborious piece. Now only the faintest echoes of its presence linger, like the ghost of a pressure on your shoulders or a half-remembered stiffness in your joints as you settle into the embrace of your somewhat lumpy, but blessedly unmetallic bed. The candle has been snuffed, plunging your small chamber into a deep, velvety darkness. A darkness that feels both comforting and profound after hours spent peering through narrow eye slits or under the brim of a helm. The cool night air, drifting through the arrow loop or the ill-fitting shutters of your window, carries the distant, muted sounds of a castle settling into slumber, the soft shuffle of a late returning servant, the far-off, lonely call of a watchman on the highest tower, the sigh of the wind as it whispers around ancient stone. These are the sounds that replace the constant, personal symphony of your armor, the creaks, the clinks, the groans of leather and steel that have been your closest companions since sunrise. Now, there is a different kind of sound, the sound of your own breathing, deep and even, as your body begins to yield to the profound fatigue that has been steadily accumulating beneath the surface of your nightly composure. Each exhalation seems to carry away another fragment of the day's tension, another memory of restricted movement or the dull ache of metal pressing against bone. The images of the day might drift through your mind, softened now by the distance of approaching sleep, the glint of sun on a practice sword, the focused frown of Sir Kalen over the chessboard, the rough texture of the bread at supper, the cool, smooth surface of your breastplate under your oiling cloth. These impressions are no longer sharp or demanding. They are becoming part of the tapestry of your stored experiences, woven into the larger narrative of your life within these stone walls, a life lived in service, in readiness, and so often in steel. Let the phantom sensations of the armor dissolve. Let the memory of its weight become a gentle pressure, lulling you further into rest. There are no more drills to attend, no more patrols to make, no more meals to navigate with gauntleted hands. Not tonight. Tonight, there is only the deep, restorative peace of the darkness and the promise of oblivion, however temporary, in sleep. The castle watches around you, a silent, steadfast guardian, just as you have been a guardian within it. And as you drift away, may your dreams be light, unburdened by the memory of iron, and may your rest be complete,